Today's episode is brought to you by Forvis Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. In 25 years, Jason T. Smith grew his single physiotherapy practice into a franchise of 140 locations. He sold Motion Health Group, the Southern Hemisphere's largest physiotherapy franchise, for $100 million. So how did Jason achieve all of that? Well, he details every step of the way in his book, Unlikely. Chris Ashmore wants to know why unlikely for the title.
It's a curious title, isn't it? It kind of hopefully sparks a little bit of imagination. I think unlikely because it's the best single word description of my story. I'm an unlikely success. I'm an unlikely entrepreneur. I often introduce myself as being an accidental businessman, a failed medical missionary, a reluctant CEO. I tend to succeed better at the things I don't try than the ones I do. I've made more mistakes than I've got it right. And so unlikely kind of feels like the right place to start.
Well, speaking of place to start, can you walk me through, in a nutshell, of course, how you grew the Back in Motion franchise?
Yeah, so we started a very small physiotherapy practice out of the carport at home. And it was only ever there to pay the mortgage until I could get into the developing world with my wife to work amongst the poorest of the poor. But after 5 years of not being able to extract myself from this small business, we had a prototype. We had a business that looked scalable. I then launched 12 more practices in the 3 years that followed that. And at our peak, we were launching a business a month as we scaled this brand around Australia and New Zealand and signed master agreements in the UK and Canada and South Africa. And so, there's no overnight success, Chris, but we grew the brand from garage to the ASX in 25 years it took to get to that point.
Wow. Did you have that goal in mind to list it on the ASX from those early days?
Not at all. This was only ever to buy me an airline ticket to get overseas, to really live out the calling that I thought my wife and I had, which was to be missionaries. And hence the title Unlikely. Like, I'm more surprised at our story than any of my readers will be, because it was the furthest thing from our imagination that we could expect. But we did have a defining moment in there, Chris. We realised that if we could build an ethical business on scale across the country, it would generate an economic engine, and we could do more good for the developing world through a successful enterprise by sending tens, maybe even hundreds of others than just me and my wife packing a suitcase and going on our own.
Other than the calling and perhaps the why behind your business, any particular keys to the success of the company?
Yeah, it's never one thing, is it? Colonel Sanders had 11 secret herbs and spices. I write a chapter in the book called Little Things, Big Wins. And it's because when I get asked that question, I think it's the 100 cents that make up the dollar. It's lots of little things that contribute. But, in our case, I think, and this would be true, I would presume, of most businesses, people matter. People matter. It's always relationship over things. And so you gather the right people. They become your best opportunity. They also become your greatest hardship and your biggest regret. But people are at the core of it. I then think in our business, we had to disrupt the industry. Physiotherapy was very much around treating pain and injury and sickness. And what we wanted to do was promote health. So we actually had to get at the top of the cliff and catch people before they fell, and by doing that, create a whole different paradigm for business. We had to invest into technology, because it doesn't matter what business you're in these days, we're all in the technology business. We had to build automation and systems. I think that helped us succeed. And then I think mostly we had to appreciate that every business, no matter how fast it's growing, it needs to consolidate. It has to have periods of rest and recovery, just like an athlete. And so we would build into our cycle of growth a year or two of just recovery and consolidation into our business, and then we would grow again. And I think that preserved our people. So there's a few of the little things that I think contribute to some of our big wins.
Right. Not to be negative, but you did mention before some of the setbacks, some of the things that held you back. What challenges did you come across as you were growing the business?
Yeah, more hardships than highlights, I can tell you that. We won our fair share of awards, but I think the story is mostly peppered with personal betrayals, financial distress. We sold our home in there to try and keep everything going. We had corporate espionage as our group got bigger. We had various people trying to undermine our brand. We got dobbed into a parliamentary inquiry, which made me, it took 3 years to clear our name, and that was a horribly stressful period. You had this little pesky virus called COVID. We had the GFC in there. I mean, there was no shortage of reasons to fail or at least give up. And I would say every one of those hardships became opportunities to either get buried and die or to be planted and grow.
Right.
And obviously in our case, we tried to make the most of every one of those hardships and learn from it.
Absolutely. Because, you could turn cynical, or you could, if you've got the temperament, see the positive side, which you've done.
Yeah, and I wouldn't like to suggest I'm the model for that on every occasion, but I think after you chew enough sand, you realise it's good to spit that stuff out and keep moving. When you're going through hell, keep going. Don't stop. Don't stay there.
Well, you did keep going, and you sold the business for $100 million, which is a price many business owners would absolutely just dream about. Can you tell me about that time?
Yeah, I'd been getting restless for a few years, and my little antenna were up, wondering when and how we might exit this business. Some of my franchisees had been with us for 15 years, and they were eagerly anticipating the big payday. And during COVID, our business grew 25%. So I had unsolicited offers wanting to acquire us. And so after some careful deliberation, we intentionalised that process, ended up with over 90 expressions of interest.
Wow.
90 parties, which just created a bidding war in our favour, which meant we got probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be acquired through a parent company on the ASX, merge with some other big brands, and get a valuation for everybody's hard work that was probably the best it would ever be. So we were very grateful for that.
No doubt. Now, for those listening, the economy is not doing so well at the moment, and for those businesses that perhaps are stuck in a rut or looking to grow, any advice?
I'd hate to presume advice because I know everybody lives through different experiences, but if I just shared my greatest discovery, I think, along the way, it would be that I grew more in the valleys than I ever did at the summit. That, of course, we always want to ascend to the top and get the view and celebrate success, quote unquote. But actually, when I think about it, it's in the valleys between the mountain peaks that you catch your breath, you learn the technique of the climb, you kind of build a strategy, you lick your wounds, your character and your competency is developed in the hard places, not at the top. And so I would just encourage anyone who's having a bit of a difficult time right now to really learn what they need to learn and not despair that the sun will rise tomorrow, but most importantly, you will be better equipped for the next day if you can gather some lesson from your current experience. And even if it's incremental change, again, all those cents, all those pennies add up to $1. And don't believe anybody who says that life is always successful. It isn't. It's the hard times that develop you to be able to sustain the good times.
Well said, Jason. Before we go, what's next for you?
Yeah, it's nice to have written the book. I don't have a demanding writing schedule now, but my wife and I run a foundation, so we're spending a fair bit of our time investing into projects across the world in some developing communities. We do a fair bit of investing, and I'm doing a lot of speaking and mentoring because I've had good people invest into me, and the best thing I think I can do now is pay that forward. So no shortage of things to do.
That was Jason T. Smith, entrepreneur and author of Unlikely. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schildberger, Chris Ashmore, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Be Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Forvis Mazars. To find out more, visit forvismazars.com/au. That's FORVISMAZARS.com/au.